Let's bring in CFRA equity analyst Scott Kessler. He just downgraded Twitter to sell from a hold late this morning. Scott, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Melissa.
The stock bounced a little bit off of Ned Siegel's tweets, but at the same time, it's still down significantly. Is there a concern on your part that even if that 70 million active, or I should say 70 million account number that they removed does not impact the MAU number of 336 million or so, that there could still be a component of that 336 that are bots that were programmed to, fly under the radar of these screening processes to not be caught and called out as bots?
In short, yes. And I would also point out that could this limit future growth to some extent? Maybe. That's, I think, secondary. I think the bigger picture issue is that through Friday, Twitter shares were, I think, the best performer in the S&P 500 in the technology sector. They almost doubled year to date. The PE is or was close to 60. The valuation to us seems stretched at best. And honestly, this is just kind of an additional consideration to remind people more about risk.
If the Washington Post story never broke, Scott, would you still downgrade the stock today to a sell?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a consideration that is secondary at best. But I think what's going on here is, look, I think Twitter has had, and we acknowledge this in our note from this morning, a lot of positive momentum across a number of different fronts. And that's great, and it's largely, if not overly reflected in the stock. This is, I mean, not to bore people, but this is to some extent a garden variety valuation call that we're trying to make here.
Okay.
The stock has risen excessively, and we think right now doesn't really reflect not just some of the risks, but some of the execution issues that could crop up as soon as later this month.
Scott, I'm not picking on you particularly, but I'm just wondering, it seems to me that is, as far as Wall Street analysts go that cover Twitter, it's either naive or they're just not doing their homework when they don't take into consideration what percentage they were guesstimating bots represented to the monthly active users on Twitter's accounts. To be removing that many, I would think, is a positive. And if I'm somebody who's reticent about going on Twitter and I see that they're getting rid of the bad guys, maybe I'm going to go back again. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Bill, I think that's a reasonable point, and obviously I heard your conversation a little earlier about how, look, this is positive for the company, but I think what it speaks to is what Julia was referencing, which is this notion of, how pervasive was this issue? Because we don't really have an exact number. The Washington Post talked about 70 million users. Ned Siegel, the CFO, said, well, it's not really that many in the context of our monthly active user count, but we don't know exactly what the implications will be. I think that over the near term, what it speaks to is really the fact that this is not the first time that Twitter has made these kind of adjustments in terms of getting rid of accounts or how they count them. And I think it just reminds people that as much as this stock reflects perfection in terms of execution and opportunity, there are, we think, a number of risks that people just are not accounting for at this point.
Very quickly, I may not admit to a quick answer, but how transferable are the concerns that are at Twitter across other companies, other social media platforms? In other words, how can we believe the numbers?
Right. I mean, Tyler, I think that's an important question that's come up around social media for almost as long as it's been around. The difference, though, is that Twitter, I think, allows and maybe passively almost encourages people to some extent to take aliases or not use their real names. Other prominent social media platforms like Facebook or like Snapchat, they are focused on the notion of the individual and the persona and associating that with a name and identity. So that's why it's perhaps more of an issue for Twitter than some of the other platforms that we know and use.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.